Good evening to you all. I'd like to call this meeting to order, the Monday, April 25th, 2022 meeting of the Falls Church City Council, and ask if you'd be so kind in joining me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes. Ms. Conley? Oh, no. Here. Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Okay, I can hear everybody. I can hear nobody except Snyder. Are the dais mics working?
I don't know. Are they working? The audience, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Just make sure you all have the microphones close to you.
All right. Madam Clerk, do we need to do anything special with Mr. Snyder?
Yes, there's a motion for electronic participation. That's at all of your places, if somebody would like to do that. And Mr. Snyder needs to identify the remote location and reason for participation by electronic means first before a motion.
Sure. Tucson, Arizona, purpose, job-related meetings.
All right. And do
Mr.
we?
Mayor.
Yes.
I move that the City Council approve electronic participation by Dave Snyder in tonight's meetings for personal reasons pursuant to the City Council's policy on participation in meetings through electronic means as adopted by Resolution 2022-02.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Hardy on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. And Mr. Snyder may participate electronically in all business.
All right.
Thank you all very much.
Sure. Thanks for joining us. Let's go on. Do we have a motion regarding the meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
All right.
Abstentions? The ayes have it. So we do have some special proclamations this evening, and some folks in the audience. We're so happy you were able to join us this evening. Ms. Hardy is going to do the first one regarding a proclamation in support of Stroke Smart City campaign. And I know we've had some ongoing conversations. We're delighted there's folks here in person in relation to this proclamation. So Ms. Hardy, Vice Mayor Hardy.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Whereas a stroke is a serious medical emergency caused by the interruption or reduction of the blood supply to part of the brain, preventing brain tissue from getting oxygen and nutrients. And whereas stroke symptoms include trouble speaking and understanding what others are saying, paralysis or numbness of the face, arm, or leg, trouble seeing in one or both eyes, headache, and trouble with walking and or balance. And whereas 1 in 6 people will have a stroke in their lifetime, and stroke is the leading cause of long-term disability. And whereas there are life-saving treatments that must be administered within 3 to 4 hours once stroke symptoms begin, and only a very small percentage of patients get to the hospital within the treatment window because the majority of people do not know how to spot a stroke or the importance of calling 911 immediately. And whereas the stroke onset to 911 time has not significantly changed for the last 25 years, and whereas the City of Falls Church public and private schools are encouraged to make Stroke Smart, Spot a Stroke, Stop a Stroke, Save a Life part of their training for all students, faculty, and families. And whereas the City of Falls Church health and safety focused entities such as hospitals, clinics, physicians' medical practices, pharmacies, fire, EMS, public safety, and all city employees will be urged to participate in improving City of Falls Church stroke literacy through educating all employees, volunteers, and associated communities. And whereas the City of Falls Church community, including businesses, civic organizations, senior communities, faith-based organizations, and inhabitants, will be encouraged to participate and contribute to the Stroke Smart, Spot a Stroke, Stop a Stroke, Save a Life campaign. And whereas the City of Falls Church recognizes the importance of stroke recognition and of dialing 911 immediately to reduce the onset of stroke to 911 interval, and thereby be a model for other communities to advance the vision of a stroke-smart America.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the City of Falls Church will hereinafter endeavor to be a stroke-smart city in support of the Spot a Stroke, Stop a Stroke, Save a Life campaign. So I've got the proclamation here. Are there folks in the audience who'd like to come forth and speak or receive this proclamation up front? All right, we have 2 copies, so.
Sure. Hi, I'm Alan Stillman, and just first want to thank you. I'm the creator of this campaign, and just briefly, why I did this is that when I was 12 years old, I was raised by my grandmother and my mother. I didn't have a dad, and one day my grandmother wasn't quite right. She was having a stroke, but we had no idea. We waited 3 days. It was a Monday, and Thursday she was still laying there in a horrible state. Finally, I begged my mother. She called 911, and she had a horrible outcome. She never spoke again. She never moved again. She became a complete shut-in, died locked in her body. And my mother, who struggled with depression to begin with, went into a really deep depression and overdosed on sleeping pills. And so I lost my 2 parents because of a stroke and spent the rest of my life in a foster home until I grew up. And so I learned that people can get treatment and avoid those kinds of outcomes if they just learn to know what's going on and don't wait 3 days, what a difference it could make. So I started this campaign, and it's a very simple idea. You know, we call it, we want you to be stroke smart, which means you know what a stroke is, how to look for it, and what to call 911. We ask that you stay stroke smart, that you remember it, because it's hard to remember things, and it's really simple. We just ask people to take little magnets and wire cards and hold on to them. And then we then ask you to just be stroke champions. Just carry the message forward, because we can touch the 250 employees who work for your city, but we ask each one of them to touch others and to touch others. And if we can get this whole town or any whole town to do this, we can save a lot of lives with just a little piece of information. So I really appreciate your taking the time for this and being part of this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. We have 2 proclamations. I don't know if you'd like to come forth and receive those. And if there's anyone else here as well from your organization, they're all welcome to come forward if they'd like at this time.
But
You can speak, sure.
my name is Grace Rossetto, and I'm a resident of Falls Church at 502 West Broad Street. And my sister Nancy represents the stroke survivor community. And my remarks are very short, but a reminder that a stroke may come like a thief in the night, silently draining life forces from the brain and destroying body parts with each passing minute. For my sister Nancy Rizzo, a major stroke struck at midday of March 29th, 2017, her 69th year, 5 years ago. Her right arm and leg paralyzed, her speech lost to aphasia. She retains a lot of her deep cognitive resources. A former special education teacher with 2 master's degrees in education. She was also a civilian employee and director of the Fort Bragg Family Services Program, a master gardener, and a realtor for Remax for 13 years. Nancy was a force for good in her community. She founded and ran a safe home for battered women in Durham, North Carolina, led a restoration fundraising project to protect a Durham park icon, and owned only rescue dogs. The Nancy we know and love today is still a life force. Her high quality of life is supported by Suzanne Coyle and the staff at the Stroke Comeback Center in Vienna. It is a lifeline for Nancy's continuing progress in learning and practicing communication skills. The speech, occupational, and physical therapists at the Kensington and its health and wellness program keep Nancy moving forward daily. The work of Alan Stillman educates the communities about what concrete steps it can take to support stroke survivors. We caretakers and families of stroke survivors depend on the kindness and expertise of these strangers who have become friends to understand what we need and assist in providing it. We are forever grateful.
Thank you very much. So if you'd like to come forth, anyone in the audience, you're certainly most welcome to. Thank you for those moving comments. And I believe, did the clerk put some information as well outside in the hallway? So anyone, we'd encourage every single person here, when you leave, to pick up some information. Very simple, straightforward, out in the foyer. So please take some before you leave, each and every one of us.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many things to remember.
Thank you. And again, thank you for those moving comments. Thank you.
Thank you for working.
And so, Mr. Shields, we've spoken as well previously about making sure city employees can receive this information and get the word out, and then that will have a multiplying effect from there and their families and their friends as well. So,
Indeed, we'll do that. Thank you, Mayor, and we'll communicate that to all city employees, and the school administration has agreed to do the same. And
all right, thank you very much. Our next proclamation is recognition of community helpers during COVID. Ms. Conley, would you like to do the honors?
It's not a proclamation.
Oh, we don't do it?
No, he has some.
All right, Joe Carter, you ready, Mr. Carter? Officer Carter, come on forward.
Sorry, I'm going to kind of bring them up as I speak. We'll just have them here. Mike has some plaques he's going to give each one. But good evening, Mayor Charter and members of council. My name is Joe Carter. I'm the Emergency Management Coordinator for the city. Back in 2019, when Chief Gavin assigned me to the Office of Emergency Management, I was able to go through the academy, which certified me in Virginia as an emergency manager. And at that time, there was two very distinct issues in that class that stood out. And the first was every incident begins and ends in your locality. And the second thing was emergency management is an all-community approach. And little did any of us know at that time that COVID-19 would put us in a position to use all of our government resources to stabilize our government services and to force us to rely on our residents and business owners like never before. Tonight, with Deputy Emergency Manager Mike Stady and Chief Mary Gavin, I'm honored to acknowledge those members of the community who were most involved during the city's fight against COVID-19. Early on in the pandemic, masks were probably the most important thing that you could get and come by, and they were very difficult in attaining. And tonight, I have Ms. Karen Reddy, who's with me here. I have Jenny Carroll, who is representing the Mary Stiles Public Library staff. I have Amy from Zoya's Atelier. I didn't kill it, did I? All right. And I also have Fawn Coleman. I have Melanie Carter, which she has the same last name, so you know she's a good person. And Pam Harris Strawn. And they are with us tonight from the Northern Virginia Alumni Chapter, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. Their contributions early in COVID either produced or donated over several thousand masks to the city, which undoubtedly saved lives because most of those masks went to our vulnerable communities, to our public employees who could not work from home and had to be here every day to maintain government services. So I wanted to recognize them first, because first off, like I said, in the pandemic, masks were the number one priority, and without their services and without their volunteer help, we wouldn't have been able to do and keep people safe like we did. So I just want to thank you guys, and for that, we have a plaque that we'd like to issue all of them.
This is for Karen.
Carol? Let's go ahead and give them all, yeah. If you guys could just stay here, because afterwards, we're going to take a photo as well. Next, as we got into COVID and the vaccines were being distributed throughout the state, Safeway, by way of Fairfax Health, offered 8 shot clinics here in the city that were at the community center. Through their efforts, over 800 people who were otherwise wouldn't have been vaccinated were able to do so. Tiffany Bokier, she's not here with us tonight, but she was critical in running these shot clinics. We did get her a plaque, but unfortunately she can't be here, so I will get that plaque to her. But her efforts, along with other members of the community who had specifically Vice Mayor Hardy and Len Nguyen from our school system, were very helpful in reaching out to our vulnerable community, whether it be at the Eden Center or other areas within the city where we had vulnerable residents. So I just wanted to thank you and Leanne as well for your assistance. Back when all of COVID started, Chief Gavin kind of kept us all together and moved us around, but she kept Ed Lancaster. She crowned him as our safety officer for the entire city. And for those of you who know Ed, he takes his job and what people ask him to do very seriously. And what he did was we needed barricades for our public-facing counters that weren't protected. And Ed took his time and his efforts, and he built barricades for each public-facing counter, but just not for the public-facing counters, but all of the offices where people were in that felt uncomfortable and wanted some type of barrier. On top of that, throughout the pandemic, whether it be an employee who got COVID or just checking on people to make sure they were okay, Ed was a phenomenal advocate for the city and taking care of all of our employees and also at times reaching out to the community and taking care of them as well. Ed is on vacation, and Ed will not be here tonight as well, but I thought it was important to recognize him. Also, last but certainly not least, Public Information Officer Susan Finarelli went above and beyond throughout this pandemic. She probably had the hardest job of us all with making sure that we had the correct information that went out to the city and surrounding area, because we all know if you put the wrong information out there, it's hard to really come back from that. So the stress that she encountered, just making sure that everything was correct, making sure the city was one voice, one way, was phenomenal. So I wanted to take this time to thank her as well. But she's not here either. I think I'm going to take it personally that some people didn't show up. No, I'm just kidding. But at this time, if I want to see if Chief Mary Gavin has anything that she would like to say. And then after that, any questions or photos we'll take.
Thank you, Joe. Obviously, Joe and actually Mike Stady here were the tip of the spear when it came to COVID. And we're very fortunate at that time to be able to pivot and assign Mike to Joe to help us through. And as many of us have, there's this COVID, I guess, tire or fatigue that everyone experienced. But we didn't. And we didn't in large part because of Joe. And like the efforts he said that Ed Lancaster, for everyone, there was every day or every weekend, there was a COVID check-in, text messages, making sure everyone was engaged. And so we're really grateful because that kept us going, because the morale during COVID was really important. And my hats off to Joe, particularly Mike, and again, like you said, Ed. But the community members were the first ones to step in and make us safe, and we so appreciate that. We did have some very serious COVID cases here in the city for employees that it's believed that they may have contracted it here. So these safety measures were key in saving lives, and they certainly did. And we were very fortunate that to date we haven't lost anybody, but we had some very serious illnesses. So we retain our safety every day. We have Ed still as our safety officer, and we will not let our guard down, in large part because of Joe. So we'd like to thank Joe. I mean, all the directors have acknowledged the fact that Joe has led us through this kind of with grace, and gave everyone dignity in that too, because it wasn't always easy. So thank you. Thanks, Joe.
All right, well, thank you all. Why don't we come forward for a picture with all of you? But this is, we greatly appreciate all the great work you all did. This is one of the great crises of the modern era, and so thank you for helping lead us through it.
You'll be in the picture.
Oh, no, I'm gonna.
You gotta be in the
No, no, no.
You gotta get in the picture too.
I want to put the picture.
Yeah, she can.
Before they get into another subject.
All right, great looking group, and a smile, several cameras. Make sure everybody's good. Good.
All right, Madam Clerk, any oaths of office to administer today?
Is there anybody here who needs to take an oath of office for their new term? I don't believe so, thank you.
I'm sorry?
I don't have anybody here for an
Okay, let's
oath
move on
tonight.
then to receipt of public comments. Do you want to start with the summary of written comments?
Yes, I will. For budget, CIP, and tax comments, Phoebe Hamill said she didn't understand shorter hours at the library after the input of so much capital into the building. The Falls Church Social Justice Committee supports funding the Renting to Refugees initiative. VPAS supports funding the ESC's Community Climate Mitigation Energy Action Plan and the CACT's Multimodal Transportation Plan. Andy Young supports funding a $100,000 annual budget for bicycle infrastructure. And the following oppose enacting a commercial and industrial tax at this time: Sally Cole, the Economic Development Authority, the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce, Eric Pelton, and Brian Williams. Henry Bartholomew provided comments on the Greenway Downs traffic calming study. Sean Dakin expressed concern about pedestrian safety because of the closing of the sidewalk at Washington and Broad for demolition of the building at that corner. 2 students from Haycock Elementary wrote to the mayor about the importance of trees. Alan Meisenheimer expressed concern about speeding and pedestrian safety along West Broad Street. And we did get, let's see, Don Brobst sent an email this afternoon, and he said that he's concerned about the increase in property assessments. Let's see. He said Virginia law was put in place to limit property tax revenue increases to 101% in any cycle, and he does not believe it allows for runaway taxing authority resulting in windfall tax revenue. And that's our final comment.
All right, so we'll move on now to the receipt of public comment. That's for folks here in the audience. So anyone in the audience is welcome to speak. If you so desire, please fill out a speaker slip like this one in the foyer. Can you hear me? Okay, in the foyer, and hand it to the clerk who's sitting right there, and then she will hand it to me, and you will be able to speak. I'll call your name. When your name is called, if you'd be so kind as to state your name and address for the record, and keep your comments to 3 minutes. At the present, our one and only speaker is Samuel Butler. And Mr. Butler, you're welcome to come forward now.
Thank you so much. So this is going to be, I can speak. This is going to be,
There you go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is going to be a little bit different, maybe a little bit more fun and interactive. But to start, I want to read a quote today from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who said today, to avert climate catastrophe, the main emitters must drastically cut emissions starting this year. This means accelerating the end of our fossil fuel addiction and speeding the deployment of clean, renewable energy. Every second counts. It's time for urgent climate action. That is from the Secretary General of the United Nations. Now, for the interactive part, I don't know how much time I have left, but no need to response. Your response is just in considering this and reflecting on it. Audience, you can participate in this as well. I would ask you to close your eyes and imagine a place in the community, a place that hasn't changed in a very, very long time, that almost seems like it could never change. And you're going there to take a picture. Once you get there, you drop your camera and you pick it back up. And when you stand back up, it's 50 years in the future. What do you see in that place? And if you all have pen and paper, I encourage you to reflect on that, think about that, and write that down for yourselves. I'd love to read your responses. Nothing else, just that reflection. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Suzanne Coyle. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Coyle, and I'm the Executive Director of the Stroke Comeback Center. On behalf of the families we serve at Stroke Comeback, I would like to thank the Falls Church City Council for your quick and enthusiastic response to the Stroke Smart Virginia initiative. Someone in the United States has a stroke every 40 seconds. It's the fourth leading cause of death in Virginia and a leading cause of disability. Increasing the public's ability to quickly recognize the signs of stroke and the importance of immediately calling 911 will save lives and maximize recovery after stroke. And we look forward to working with your community members to share this important message. If you're not familiar with Stroke Comeback Center, we are the only nonprofit organization in the greater D.C. area with the sole mission of supporting stroke survivors and their families throughout their recoveries, and most importantly, regardless of their ability to pay for our services. We have a center in Vienna, in Rockville, and a virtual Stroke Comeback Center, and we've supported many stroke families from Falls Church City since our founding in 2004. Many of our survivors, such as Nancy, have aphasia, a disorder that impacts all aspects of language but does not impair intelligence. So when planning for our upcoming Aphasia Awareness Month event, we thought it was important to hold this event in a Stroke Smart community. So I'm pleased to announce that we'll be bringing our community to yours for our Thriving with Aphasia celebration here at the State Theater on June 30th. It will be a celebration of all the ways that our survivors thrive, especially those with aphasia, and we hope you will join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Are there any other speakers, Madam Clerk?
There are not. I did receive a comment on the budget from the Urban Forestry Commission. Do you want to save that until the public hearing?
You can go ahead and read it now.
Okay. I believe you all received it in email, but it is a request to add a maintenance worker, full-time employee at $70,000 and update the city's tree inventory with $100,000, and that's a request for this budget cycle.
All right, thank you. So unless there's any other public comment at this time, why don't we move to council requests? Are there any council requests? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Just one quick question for the manager. I noticed a communication today about the time allowed for appeal of assessments. And the date was given as April 29th, I think.
Yes, I believe that is
Is
correct.
a statutory date? It seemed, considering that we're just now doing the budget, it seemed rather soon for there to be a deadline for appealing assessments. I just wonder, since the budget schedule this time has slid a little bit for reasons beyond our control, if we might give a little extra time to folks, let folks appeal or consider appealing their assessments. Is that something we could do? Is that an administrative activity?
I believe that date is set in the city code, and so that's why we're trying to publicize that, just so people do know that that's the date. We do acknowledge the fact that the assessor of real estate has received a number of inquiries this year, and so we want to make sure that that date is one that people are aware of, April 29th.
Okay, well, if it's set in code, then thank you for your efforts to try to communicate that to everyone.
All right, any other council requests? If not, let's move on to the report of the city manager. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. We do have an item on tonight's agenda with the West Falls project, and the senior component is on the agenda tonight, and Emily Bazemore will handle that. But before we get to that item, I do want to just say a word or two about Carly Aubrey. And Carly Aubrey has been our lead planner for the West Falls project for the past 6 years or so, and then when we moved into the procurement phase, she became the project manager for the West Falls project. Before that, she really distinguished herself with a number of projects in the city, including her involvement in Founders Row and in the Cottages project. Between Carol and Carly, I think the two of them probably have been the most deeply involved in the West Falls project over the past 3 years, attending thousands of meetings on this project, and Carly always had the big picture, but also a wonderful grasp of all the details, and she kept the whole project together with so many different stakeholders, whether it be the schools, or whether it be the community, or whether it be our staff and the design review committees that we have internally. She shepherded that work through with amazing tenacity and also attention to skill, to detail, and I think an appreciation for the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish up there to create a great place and a great new part of the city. So we're going to miss Carly very much. She has announced that she's taken a job position with Fairfax County, and we will be saying goodbye to her towards the end of this week, and of course we'll stay in touch with her, but this is something I did want to acknowledge during my remarks tonight. Emily Bazemore has stepped forward. You all have interacted with her on a number of occasions on this and other projects, and she will be doing a great job on the last phase of that project to go through the entitlements. But we're also doing a great transfer of Carly's knowledge over to staff so we can make sure that all the commitments and the site plan requirements and the voluntary concessions, et cetera, are carried out and executed by the city staff as we go forward. So Carly, thank you for your great work, and best of luck to you in your next opportunities in our adjacent community to the west. That's all I have to report tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. I'm sure I know I speak on behalf of all my colleagues in wishing Carly all the best and thank her for her extraordinary efforts over these past years. She's made quite the difference here in the city, and we know she'll have a similar impact in Fairfax County, and she'll be sorely missed. But thank you very much, Carly. Any additional comments or questions for the city manager? Why don't we move on then to business on the agenda? Madam Clerk, will you call the first item?
Yes, sir. We have TO 22-10, ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify Chapter 40, taxation, to add sections 40-215 to 40-223 to establish a classification and taxation of certain commercial and industrial property.
All right, before we get started on that, I think Ms. Conley and I would like to make a general disclosure relating to budgeting this year. Ms. Conley?
I make the following statement before City Council's discussion of TO 22-04, TO 22-05, TO 22-06, TO 22-07, TO 22-08, and TO 22-10, all relating to the FY 2023 budget. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board and a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right. I would also like to make a statement. I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 22-04, TO-2205, TO 22-06, TO 22-07, TO 22-08, and TO 22-10, all relating to the FY 2023 budget. My wife's an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. All right. Mr. Shields, who's going to handle this matter? Is it you?
I will. And so tonight we have a whole series of budget items for you to have public hearing on. This first item is consideration of the commercial and industrial tax, and that actually is not just a public hearing. Alone amongst the budget items, there is actually a request for council consideration of this item and not just a public hearing. So what has been proposed in the budget is a commercial and industrial tax that would fund transportation improvements in the city. It is something that the General Assembly has authorized the city to do back in 2013, and most of all of our adjacent jurisdictions and most of the jurisdictions in Northern Virginia have taken that authority and are covering a big portion of their WMATA expenses and other direct transportation-related improvements and enhancements that they're undertaking in their communities. So that was initially proposed as part of this budget. As we've gone through the process, we have gotten comment from the Economic Development Authority and from the Chamber of Commerce. Both have written in to express, to request the council not consider this at the present time. And I would just note that if the council chooses not to adopt this, then when we have our work session later on tonight, we'll do a markup, and one of the things we'll work through is the substitute way of which we would fund transportation if in the amount of $420,000 if the decision is not to move forward with this ordinance. So I will stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions? Ms. Conley?
Mr. Shields, this really isn't a question for you. It's more a general question for those who are opposed to this tax, and that is that we heard numerous times that if we were to put this tax on, it would be a pass-through to retail businesses. And I'm just curious, since we're not, well, we may or may not, but if we do not put this tax on, will there be a reduction for retail businesses? And I guess that's more of a question to commercial property owners, because their taxes will be going down. So I would hope that that would be reflected in the what their retail tenants are paying them.
So on average, and of course, all properties assessed individually, so there certainly could be differences in actual properties, but on average, if this C&I tax is not imposed, then the average commercial real estate will have about a 4% decrease in the tax bill next year. So how does that pass through to tenants, whether they be retail or office tenants? And I think it depends on the nature of your lease. And some leases are a triple net type of lease structure where the tenant pays the property taxes and they're just sort of dollar for dollar pass through. And then some are full service, what are called full service leases, in which case the landlord pays for the taxes and utilities and other things like that, in which case we wouldn't have any visibility as to whether that would pass through the tenants or not. So it depends on the nature of the commercial lease.
Thanks. I didn't think you were going to give me a lesson on that, and I appreciate that. I do wonder if there's a way to send that message to property owners that have the second kind of lease, that we would hope that they would partner with us now to help their retail tenants maintain their tenancy, retail and office.
Other questions? I'm going to ask the city attorney, do we need to take action on in your opinion?
Yes, I mean, you should hold a public hearing. I believe this is here for second reading of an ordinance. So you should have a public hearing and then take an action. And if council, you could defer it if you want to take it up later. You can use the motion, which is before you, which is to adopt the ordinance, or someone can move to deny approval of the ordinance if you're choosing not to adopt it.
Okay. All right, so we are having a public hearing now. If anyone would like to speak, you're certainly most welcome to. I know I do have a speaker, Meredith Miller, on the budget. I don't know whether you're speaking to this portion of the budget, or would you like to speak now or at a later time?
I meant to speak during public comment section, but my shift at the library doesn't end till 8, so I wasn't able to get here until now.
Okay, so you can, so we're having sort of little segments. The first part is about a tax that really doesn't affect residential owners so much, but it's more commercial in nature. So my guess is that's likely to be defeated or moved on from, and if you'd like, you can speak when we get to the main body of the budget. We don't want to keep you here too long, but let's go ahead and the matter's closed to the public. Do we have a motion that someone would like to make? Ms. Leon?
Motion to deny adoption of TO 22-10.
Okay. And do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. Madam Clerk?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, just to be clear, so motion to deny. So a yes vote is a vote against the CNI.
Correct. A yes vote would be
And no
to
vote.
deny approval.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries 7-0.
And you're all just
The
tricked into voting
proposed
for the...
ordinance is denied.
You did just approve the ordinance. I'm kidding, no, we didn't do that.
No, you didn't.
All right, let's move on then, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
And let's call the rest of the group, I think, maybe as one, if that's all right.
I think...
Can we just read, can we read them all out?
Do we need
and
to
the
open
public
each one
hearing?
individually, Ms. Muskowski?
I think you should call them all. You can have one.
Okay, I will read them all. Let's see, the first item is TO 22-04, ordinance fixing and determining the budget of expenditures and revenues and appropriating funds for the fiscal year 2023 general fund, school operating fund, school community service fund, school food service fund, cable access fund, sewer fund, and stormwater fund. The second is TO 22-05, ordinance fixing and determining the FY23 to FY28 capital improvements program budget and appropriating expenditure and revenue funds for the fiscal year 2023. Third one is TO 22-06, ordinance setting the rate of tax levy on real estate for tax year 2023 and on personal property, machinery, and tools, and all other property segregated by law for local taxation in the city of Falls Church, Virginia for tax year 2022. We also have TO 22-07, ordinance to amend the Chapter 42 utilities to revise sewer rates and fees as of July 1, 2022, and TO 22-08, ordinance to set the stormwater utility billing rate unit rate in accordance with Chapter 42, Article 6 of the Code of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, as of July 1, 2022.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Shields?
So, Council, we will be having a work session on these budget items after this meeting, and we do have a brief staff presentation just in terms to set the stage for that work session discussion. So for the public's benefit, if the council would like, I could just briefly summarize each of these items. Would that be helpful, just to do a quick summary
Sure.
of each? Okay. So in terms of the overall budget ordinance, that sets the operating budget for next year's fiscal year, and for the operations of the schools, it's a 6% increase of our operating budget. In the general government increase is 6%. When you add in grants and the use of building permit fees, the overall growth in spending next year is 7.6%. The budget does assume a reduction in the real estate tax rate of 8.5 cents. There was a contingency also provided, and we'll discuss that in the work session portion, but that the contingency is of $1,020,000 to provide some flexibility for the City Council as you hear public comment through the budget process. So that's a quick overview of the operating budget. The Capital Improvements Program is a 6-year spending program for transportation, facilities, stormwater, and sanitary sewer infrastructure in the city. The most dramatic part of that CIP is funding for areas of transportation, and these are all primarily grant funded, and we have just under $7 million programmed in FY 23 for transportation improvements in the city, and almost $70 million over the 6-year planning period for transportation projects. I will then move to the two utility funds, and just note that on the stormwater fund, we are asking for a 3% increase in the stormwater fee. That would translate into the average fee for the average homeowner in the city is just about $250 per year. And so that 3% increase in the fee would be about a $7 impact for the average homeowner in the city. And this is asked for to deal with price escalations that we are experiencing for maintenance and personnel expenditures in the stormwater fund. The capital improvements program for the stormwater fund will be relying on ARPA dollars in the amount of $7 million, plus some additional grants that we have just recently received through the Community Priority Program in concert with Councilmember Don Byers' office to help fund our stormwater program over the next several years. The last thing I will note then is on the sanitary sewer fund. There again, we're asking for the first rate increase since 2016, and that would be about a 3% increase in the sanitary sewer charge, in the commodity charge, and that is also driven by inflation in materials and costs to run the sanitary sewer collection. All of our sanitary sewer treatment is conducted by either by Arlington County at the 4 Mile Run plant or by Alexandria at the Alexandria Renew plant, and they're experiencing cost increases and passing those on to us as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions on these budget items, and look forward to the work session later this evening.
All right, any questions at this time for Mr. Shields? Mr. Duncan?
Can I ask just quick questions? The stormwater fee was $7 impact in sanitary sewer. What's the average impact on a typical house?
It's $3.60 per quarter, and so a quarter is a 3-month bill.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to open it up now to public comment. And Ms. Miller, if you'd like at this time, you'd be most welcome to come forth and say your piece.
Good evening. My name is Meredith Miller, and I live at 5405 Watercrest Court in Fairfax, Virginia. I am an employee of the Mary Raleigh Stiles Public Library, and the following statement is my own and does not reflect the views of my employer. I felt called to speak tonight in response to disheartening comments made by members of council at the work session on Monday, April 18th. Specifically, the comments that the funds requested for hiring additional staff to expand library hours were excessive. It was disheartening to hear that the people responsible for my salary consider my salary excessive. Let me tell you what I do to earn my excessive salary that does not allow me to reside in the community where I work and serve. Every week, I spend up to 15 hours on a public-facing service desk. Every week, I spend 48 hours planning and presenting story times. Every week, I spend 8 hours planning and presenting programming. Every week, I spend up to 16 hours or over working on collection development. Every week, I try to spend 4 hours on social media outreach, and I try to spend 2 hours on professional development, but those things often get swept aside because if you were keeping score as I was speaking, my list of tasks and the time required to complete them adds up to over 40 hours a week. These numbers err on the conservative side. For example, during the summer, the amount of time that I spend on programming doubles. I often work through my lunch to keep up with my workflow, and I have these same responsibilities as a 24-hour-a-week employee. Janie's exact words to me when she offered me a full-time job were, 3 years ago, now we can pay you for all the work that you do. Council often talks about the responsibility to the citizens they serve. Council also has a responsibility to the people they've hired to serve the public. Council has deferred this responsibility, as can be shown by the recent mass exodus of city employees. The library hasn't lost staff members during the pandemic because Jenny is able to balance her responsibility to the community with her responsibility to her staff to make the library a safe, positive, healthy place to work. When Jenny brought the need to reduce hours to the library board, it was after great deliberation and hard work to balance these responsibilities. When she tells the council what is needed to expand hours and programming, she does not do so willy-nilly. She has put the same thought process into play. On a personal level, I can tell you that hiring additional staff will allow the library staff to further share front-facing desk responsibilities. Less time spent on the front-facing desk translates into additional time and staff working on planning and expanding programming, something that the public has been asking for. As a full-time employee, I am unable to perform all of my assigned tasks in a week to the high quality the public has come to expect. An additional 4 hours spent off desk means that I can address these tasks and not feel so burned out and spread thin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak on the budget? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Mr. Shields, let me ask you, in terms of just mechanically, how this is expected to go. So our next item deals with the 10-acre project. We'll go back to the budget, 15, 20 minutes or whenever we finish the next item. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're going to have a further conversation. Maybe now's not the best time for that, but during our budget work session, we can do that. All right. So let's, unless there's anything else that needs to be said at this moment, move on to our next item, Madam Clerk.
Yes, we have first reading of TR 22-17, resolution to grant a special exception site plan, section 48-488.B3 for a mixed-use building with a building height up to 15 stories on approximately .76 acres of land for the proposed senior housing building of the West Falls Economic Development Project, located at 7124 Leesburg Pike, portion of Real Property Code number 51-221-010 on application by TC Mid-Atlantic Development 5 Incorporated.
Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. And so what we'll do tonight is we'll start off with a staff report from Emily Bazemore, who is our lead planner for this case. And we also have the development team, TC Mid-Atlantic, which is on the call, and they can speak to this. The council had a work session on this recently, so we'll just provide a quick update and an overview of the site plan that is before the council. The request tonight is to take the action to refer this application for the site plan approval to 4 boards and commissions, a more limited referral, given the fact that the overall site plan has already been through the more in-depth review process. And so the 4 are the Planning Commission, the Economic Development Authority, the Urban Forestry Commission, and the Architectural Advisory Board. Ms. Bazemore, if you could provide the staff report, and then we'll turn it over to the development team.
Yes, will do. Good evening, Council. It's so great to be with you guys tonight. So as Mr. Shields noted, the request tonight is to refer the application out to 4 different boards and commissions. The special exception entitlement that council approved for this site on August 9th, 2021 established the allowable use, senior housing, building footprint, building height, and other general design elements. The SESP application on file addresses final architecture and final site design and engineering. Recommendation, staff recommends passage of the proposed motion. Moving down to line 15 of the staff report, just looking at application status, on February 16th of 2022, TC Mid-Atlantic filed a complete SESP application for part of Block D1 for senior housing in the West Falls Church Economic Development Project. Moving on to line 25, I have some notes captured from your work session. You all reviewed the application on April 4th, 2022 in work session, and feedback and the applicant's responses are summarized in the table below. Additional information provided since the April 4th work session are noted in gray throughout the staff report, but just looking at the table really quick, some of the questions were regarding differences in materials. So we have notes captured about the precast panels. There was a question about the lead level for the building. Again, it's going to be lead gold. There was a question regarding the operator for the building. That will be SRG, Senior Resource Group. There was clarification regarding when the ground floor retail will open in relation to the residential part of the building. The applicant team responded that they intend to deliver this portion a couple months ahead of the residential component. And then, of course, there were some questions about parking, and specifically, is there a TDM, and a request of staff to review the TDM. We have requested additional documents in the form of submission 1.1 with a site-specific TDM that's also kind of part of that original TDM that was approved back in August. Moving on to line 37 of the staff report, just wanted to capture a few notes on the site for you guys' review. Again, the site is Block D1, which is part of the West Falls Church Economic Development Project, a 10-acre site. It's located at the northeast corner of the project site at the intersection of West Falls Station Boulevard and Mustang Alley. The building will be a mixed-use building with a maximum height of 15 stories, along with 260,000 gross square feet of residential use and a maximum of 212 homes, including 22 memory care units or studio units, 58 assisted living units, and 132 independent living units, as well as 79,000 gross square feet of ground floor retail. I just wanted to capture also that note on line 53 that 20% of the roof space will be a green roof per the voluntary concessions submitted and accepted as part of the SEE for this site. I'm going to skip way back in the staff report to line 557. I believe that's on page 15. Yes. So looking at the TDM and parking management, the approved SEE and Phase 1 SESP for the West Falls Development Project requires implementation of a site-wide TDM plan in order to promote transportation network that offers choices in travel modes. The site-wide TDM plan includes elements such as, but not limited to, street network improvements, traffic signals, transit infrastructure, parking reduction measures, and ongoing monitoring and enforcement. The applicant team has submitted a TDM plan with their interim submission 1.1. The TDM plan includes elements from the site-wide TDM and notes the following specific elements for this building. Provide an information kiosk or shared screen with information on transit options, bike routes and walking routes, as well as contact information for commuter connections, WMATA, etc. Number 2, create a website and or mobile app for the use of residents and employees with similar information. Number 3, provide common area Wi-Fi, a copy machine, and other business amenities to aid the residents who choose to work from home. Number 4, provide for unbundling of parking fees with unit and lease. And number 5, enroll employees of retail who may ride the local transit system in SMART benefits program and provide new residents with preloaded SMART trip cards to use the WMATA services. Moving on to line 580, the parking layout provided in submission 1.1 shows the proposed location of 120 spaces reserved for the senior building, as well as 4 handicap spaces and 1 handicap van space required to be provided. So in total, we're looking at 125 senior building spaces. These spaces are distributed throughout the 4th and the 5th floors, as noted in that layout, with the majority being allocated on the 5th floor. In reviewing the TDM and the PMP, staff recommends the following. Number 1, that the TDM includes showers for buildings and for the building employees. This is consistent with the larger site-wide TDM that includes showers for employee use. Number 2, that the parking management plan be updated to show all reserved spaces. Note previous iterations showed reserved spaces for both the senior building and apartment building. Number 3, that all reserved spaces be allocated to the upper floors of the garage, further from the ground level entrances, leaving as much of the lower levels for shared parking. And finally, number 4, that the parking management plan include a narrative on how the shared parking will be managed to support retail and visitor use of the shared space. I just wanted to note on 596 as well that the fiscal impact has been updated. We talked with the EDO, and after reviewing, fiscal impact analysis will be carried over from the approved SEE application, as the changes in unit count and unit mix have not been adversely affected. And then just capturing timing again. Right now, we're at you guys for your first reading and a boards and commissions referral. And then following this, hopefully we'll be going to Planning Commission, the EDA, the AAB, and then the Urban Forestry Commission for their review as well. That's all for my presentation. The applicant team is on the line as well to give some updates.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Hiscott.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. I wanted to follow up on a couple of email messages you were copied on from our ESC members regarding the lead scorecard that's been used to make the determination that the applicant has followed the secondary criteria of delivering the minimum 20% improvement in energy performance. There have been several questions about how the applicant is defining the lead points for that project to get to that 20% reduction. There's some clarity requested on that. So as we discuss it and move it ahead, if we move it ahead and want to get some more specificity on that, please. Maybe you have it already, or maybe the applicant has it.
Yes, so I've shared that information, the request for clarification, with the applicant team. We discussed it this morning, so perhaps they're prepared to talk about it now. And if not, staff knows that additional details are needed, and we're working with the applicant to get those.
Yeah, can everyone hear me? It's Bill Brewer with Trammell Crow Company. All right. Yeah, Emily did share that request. We do not have any specific feedback on the lead scorecard. That is something we typically would not produce at the level of granularity that's been asked for until we're done with our DD, or the design development set of construction documents. And we don't anticipate hitting that milestone until the end of the year or early 2023. So we will certainly look to precedent projects to try and provide a bit more detail, but just until we kind of reach that level of development on architectural work, we won't know building systems, window sizes, that the wall assembly details, and a host of things that feed into that energy profile and the more specific outputs on the lead scorecards.
All right. Other questions? I'm sorry.
Just for clarity, so Emily, like from the staff side, that's just something you continue during the process through the end of the year to confirm that we are hitting all those targets that we've set?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. This is also in the sort of green/smart cities bucket. Ms. Bazemore, Mr. Brewer, let me take just a little brief trip. Friday, there was a program at MITRE Corporation out at McLean about smart cities research and development activities. And since this is a building that is going to be, the marquee building probably of the whole project and identify Falls Church, I just want to make sure that we are future-proofing it as much as we can in an area that they talked about at MITRE on Saturday, which is basically the expected prevalence in 10 years or less of delivery of many items that we now receive, with truck drop-offs by vertical takeoff and landing devices, better known probably as drones. And I just want to make sure that the building that we put up, which we hope will stand for generations, is built with that in mind, because within 10 years, certainly, not only will many of the items and goods that we receive now by conventional delivery be delivered by drones landing somewhere, but also it's, they talked about at the program at MITRE, even passenger to and for vertical takeoff and landing passenger activity around transit-oriented development buildings like this one. So I know it seems like way out there stuff, but it's amazing how quickly way out there gets close to you. And so I'd like, as this building goes through the super site plan review process, just to make sure that thought is factored in, and that we have a building when we finish it that will be fully compliant with whatever new and exciting technologies we're using to get goods and people around. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I would just say, this building actually sets up better than a number of things we've worked on with the alley behind. We have a very flexible loading situation. So I think that this is about as well situated as you could get for a host of delivery conditions. So.
All right, any other questions or comments? Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? Yes, sir?
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up future-proofing, Mr. Duncan. It's important to keep in mind, and 4 years ago, while speaking about this project, I came to speak with you all at City Council, and I believe some of the developers, to talk about future-proofing, specifically with regards to cars, and in 5 or even 10 years, whether many people will be driving cars and parking as opposed to car sharing or riding their bikes, which the school board and the teachers are working on to get access from the rest of the city across Haycock to that whole area connected by Metro as well. I was told that those future-proofing options were being explored, and now it sounds like we're going to have a 5-story parking garage, if I understand correctly. So I don't know, what will be done with that 5-story parking garage in 10 years if we end our fossil fuel addiction, in the words of the Secretary General, and we start getting around in other ways, and heeding the words of the teachers up at the schools on the health and wellness committees, who are talking about different ways and active non-car ways for kids to get that area, which likewise serves the whole community. So I think this is something pretty vital to think about while nothing is built yet, and we're still at ground zero, essentially. I don't know if you guys have any other...
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, any other public comment? If not, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion, council?
Mr. Mayor, I move to refer TR 22-17 to the Planning Commission, Architectural Advisory Board, Urban Forestry Commission, and Economic Development Authority for review and recommendation to City Council, schedule public hearing and final consideration for August 8th, 2022, and advertise the same according to law.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Leon on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
All right, thank you. Let's move on. Next item.
I think we're on to consent items.
That's right. So we're on to consent. Does anyone wish to remove anything from the consent agenda? If not, does someone wish to make a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
All right, we have a second.
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
All right, thank you. So now we're back on to the work session. Is that right, Mr. Shields?
Well, Mayor, before we go to work session, there is a request that I've brought forward, and it's the form of a resolution that has been brought to the council and is on the dais. It's temporary resolution 22-20. And the essence of the request is for the city council to authorize the city manager to enter into and execute an extension to the completion date or the closing date for the West Falls project until May 13th. We've been working with a fairly large team of consultants and attorneys as we've been bringing this project to closing on the 99-year ground lease for the West Falls project. With the various different parties that are involved at this point, it is the recommendation of the lead attorneys that we ask for this extension. And so with this resolution, essentially what it would do is authorize me to have what I believe will be a final amendment to the comprehensive agreement, and that would change the date from the current closing date of April 30th and add 2 weeks to that and have the closing date no later than May 13th. There are no other changes requested.
All right. Questions or comments for Mr. Shields? Ms. Leon?
Mr. Shields, can you just explain and clarify if there's any impact as a result of this ask?
So in terms of what happens at closing is, in terms of financially, in this current fiscal year, the city is to be paid $4.5 million on the ground lease. Of that amount, $1.8 million has been paid in December. $400,000 will be paid upon closing, and then the final, for this fiscal year, $2,250,000 would be paid at the end of June. So that $400,000 payment at closing would be delayed by 2 weeks. So that's kind of the direct financial impact to the city. Sort of generally speaking, we are seeking to wrap this up. We're working very hard. I think I had been personally of the view quite recently that we'd be able to make the original date, but we had a fairly frank assessment from the attorneys this afternoon, and that's the result. The result of that is the request that I'm bringing to you right now.
So in summary, minimal impact, really, in terms of fiscally. We're just trying to make sure we get quality in these very complex documents, and the attorneys that are working on it just are requesting extra time. I'm pretty sure you guys want to be done with this. This is complicated. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Or, Mr. Mayor, a couple of questions for the city manager. Who specifically is requesting this delay?
Mutual request. It's an acknowledgement by Falls Church Gateway Partners lead attorney and the city's lead outside counsel that the state of documents, if we were to really try to crunch and rush to a Friday closing this week, that there is risk that something important will be overlooked, an exhibit will be entered into incorrectly, and other substantive matters would not have the review that we would like them to have. What's been happening is with the various different banks, the lenders, the equity partners, in addition, the city's own counsel are just reviewing all the documents, and there still are questions or comments coming in on those documents, and we're not as far along as you'd want to be 4 days prior to closing.
So, just to follow up, of course, this is a long string of delays and renegotiations. Any indication at all that they're not going to meet the payment deadlines if we extend?
No, I do not believe that there's any indication of that.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Shields, let me ask a question. So we talked about the payment being delayed 2 weeks. So the total estimate of annual tax revenue is something like $5 million a year, right, at this project? And if you figure there's about 50 weeks in a year, so if we lose 2 weeks, everything gets pushed 2 weeks back, right? We've lost, quote, 2 weeks of $5 million a year, which I don't know, what does that come out to? Is that $100,000 a week? So it's 200 grand. So in about 15 minutes, we're going to be talking about 200 grand. We're going to be talking about whether we hire the person for this, or we pay the person for that, or we don't do this, or we buy a school bus. So I would just say to you and to everyone else, let's get this thing closed up, because time is money. And it's not just a week later on $1 million or $4 million interest. It's actually the tax revenue that the city is deferring or delaying for a period of weeks. So I guess from my perspective, I'd say this is it, and that ought to be conveyed. This transaction was known to be closing a year ago, a year and a half ago. So it's not like this deal just got put together today, got put together many, many, many months ago, and everybody knew when the deadline is. And so I think we are where we are, and we need to finish this thing up. But I would just say that it's real money at stake, not just the interest we lose on a payment for 2 weeks, but it's the tax revenue that the city loses out on, and then we spend, a bunch of time arguing about that we're not going to have, that we might have if we'd closed on time. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. I don't know if anyone has anything else to say. If not, I guess I would just entertain a motion, if anyone would like to make one.
Motion to adopt TR 22-20.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Is there any public comment on this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Abstain.
Mayor Charter?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0 with 1 abstention. Thank you.
All right. So now we're off to the work session. And so I would also just say at 9:30 or thereabouts, at a good breaking point, I would suggest we take a short recess and refresh ourselves and the like. So just plan for that, if you can make it that long. In the meantime, there's some candy here. Hopefully, maybe we'll be done by then.
That's right.
We have an optimistic Letty Hardy next to me. All right, Mr. Shields?
Well, thank you, Mayor. And Ms. Mester, we have just the PDF that only has, I think, 2 slides on it, just to help kind of summarize where we are. And so we'll advance to the next slide. And so this provides a quick snapshot of the discussions that have occurred to date, and I'll summarize it, and then I know that there's some additional ones that have been mentioned by individual council members, and I'll try to summarize those as well. So in terms of the discussion about final markup, on the column to the right is some allocations of ARPA dollars, and so just discuss those real quickly. That includes an allocation of $50,000 for emergency rent relief for refugees, and that's being done in cooperation and conjunction with Welcoming Falls Church and other nonprofits that are helping with the resettlement of refugees in Northern Virginia. And this would be to provide rent assistance in the city of Falls Church for refugee families. The Community Services Fund grants, that $30,000 from ARPA dollars would be used to fund the requests that were not able to be funded in the last round of HSAC approval through that competitive process. And then $130,000 is a request that would be for the weatherization for Winter Hill properties. Of that ARPA allocation, the 50 and the 30, the 50,000 and the 30,000 would actually be moving dollars that the council had already put towards emergency assistance earlier this year in December and put them to these purposes. And then the weatherization would be a new use of ARPA dollars that have not been budgeted previously. In terms of the general fund dollars, we've been discussing the contingency. So the contingency, when it was presented in late March, was $1,020,000. So tonight, the council took action to not fund the CNIE proposal this year, but to perhaps have a discussion about that with a bit more lead time in the future. But for this year's budget, then that would use $420,000 of that $1,020,000 contingency. In addition, there was a discussion last week that the treasurer, who's in the audience tonight, brought forward on senior tax relief, and that's in the amount of $65,000. There was an additional proposal that I'll show on the next slide that would increase that to $85,000 if the council were to take that additional expansion of eligibility for senior tax relief. But where we left it at the last meeting is at $65,000. So that would leave a balance of $535,000 of the contingency. And then I'll close this slide just by noting last week we did have a discussion of pavings and sidewalks maintenance. So there's several different ways that could be handled. One, to plus up our paving and sidewalks budget, which is currently at $460,000. We had discussed doubling that last week. What is shown here is a recommendation that we use $250,000 to increase the paving and sidewalks maintenance budget. We pull that out of capital reserves, and next year we do have the BJ's wholesale tax sharing agreement expires, and so we'll have $250,000 of new revenue next year. And so we would sort of be pre-deploying that new revenue and sort of pre-dedicating it to paving and sidewalks next year in next year's budget. But in this year's budget, we'd be using capital reserves to do more in that area. I would also just note, just sort of a memory of that BJ's wholesale deal, the developer at that time did request a 15-year deal, and I believe at that time it was the then chair of the Economic Development Authority, who said, well, how about a shorter time period? How about 10? And we settled at 12. And so now, because of that additional 3 years that was knocked off of that agreement, we have sooner able to take advantage of that additional $250,000 than we would otherwise. The chair of the EDA at that time was our mayor, Dave Tarter. So that's a quick summary of the markup discussion. Now, there's also been a discussion of the Environmental Services Council request for the Phase 2 of the Community Energy Plan. So Phase 1, the council's already funded, and that's underway of the whole community practical steps by which we're going to realize the basically the COG goals, which are tied to the Paris Accords goals for carbon emission reductions in the city of Falls Church. The Phase 2 of that plan would be then to drill into both city and school operations to identify our carbon emissions from our own operations. Now, our government operations are just a small portion of the community's emissions, but nonetheless, they're the ones obviously we have the direct control over, so that Phase 2 of that study is important. So that's about $50,000 to do that Phase 2 study. That's not on this chart, but it is one of the items that's been discussed. And then the bicycle plan request Our plan for that is to use the Virginia Tech study group to kickstart that bicycle plan and then internally work that into the updated bicycle master plan that the City Council would then adopt. So that's a quick summary, I think, of some of the key points that have been discussed, and I may have left some out, so I'll stop there. We do have a next slide just on the senior tax relief piece, which that font is a little bit small, but the essence of it is there was a request at the work session last week to expand the asset limits to be eligible, and that has a $20,000. We are forecasting a $20,000 fiscal impact if we do expand those eligibility limits in that last piece, and that would bring, I'm looking at the treasurer, but I believe that would bring potentially five additional people into the program, or is it a different number than that?
It might be up to 12.
It might be up to 12. And so 12 at the dollar cost of $20,000?
No. You want me to explain it?
Well, maybe let me just stop there before we go into a deep dive on senior tax relief. Maybe we'll start with the big picture in terms of how the markup overall.
So any questions, comments? Is this about the former chair of the UDA who got the reducer? Ms. Hiscott.
After the mayor takes his cut of that percentage, we can fund all kinds of things with his own percentage. I just wanted to ask Mr. Manager for clarification on the ESC, that $50,000 in terms of where it could be funded from if the council so chooses. It could be funded from the capital reserve, is my understanding. Is that correct, or?
It could be. The original intention was that we would be having a discussion in September with year-end dollars, and we were expecting to fund that phase 2 of the study at that time. If the council wishes to pre-allocate that, then it could either come out of the 535 of remaining balance, or it could come out of capital reserves.
Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Hardy.
I'll save the one for the senior tax relief for a bit. Given that we expect, or at least I'm hearing, that there are a lot more people than normal appealing their real estate assessments, is that something that we need to have a contingency for?
Well, I should have finished with what my recommendation is on that 535,000, and that would be in light of a number of points of uncertainty, but kind of the most prominent one being is the uncertainty of what the governor and the General Assembly are going to do with the state budget. What my recommendation and the finance director's recommendation would be to hold off on allocating that dollar amount until July, at which time we'll have, hopefully by then, a clear picture as to what the state government has done. That's a roundabout way of saying that would also give us, by that time, visibility in terms of appeals or any other things that are unplanned in the budget, and the contingency could also be used for those. As I think we said at the very beginning of this budget, this is the most dynamic time that the city has ever done a budget that I can ever recall in terms of cost escalation and in terms of just general uncertainty in the world. And that was the rationale for the contingency to begin with.
Okay. So I hear that sentiment and generally agree with it given the uncertainty we talked about. But I guess one thing while we're talking about adds to this markup that I propose adding that we spent some time discussing is our minimum wage. So I think along the lines of having salary parity across general government and schools, and I think that they are moving to $15 minimum wage. And I think our goal of getting 6 or 7% overall increase, I want to make sure we do that across the salary spectrum. So for our lowest paid workers, I do think it's an important policy for us to adopt a $15 minimum. And I think based on the budget Q&A, that was a relatively small budget impact of $50,000. So I guess I'll throw that on there as an additional general fund item beyond the $420 for CNI and then the $65 to $85 for the senior relief.
So my recollection on the $15 minimum was that it was just students in summer, not necessarily standard employees. Am I mistaken on that?
The response to the question in terms of HR did run the numbers, and so the people who are paid that wage are typically either seasonal or temporary employees. There are some permanent employees, though, that are currently at that $15 level, and so there is a concern about compression. That if you raise it for a certain class of people, then there's some spillover effects for other employees that you would also improve their compensation as well.
Got it, okay. By the way, Mr. Snyder has his hand up. Why don't I go ahead to him before I forget?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a question for Wyatt and Karen Bawa. I think you shared a public document that talked about advice from our financial advisors about our various reserve amounts. And I wonder if you could give us the bottom line of that, because the proposal here is I think we've already, in the city manager's budget, has taken some from the reserves, and the proposal is to take some more. I'm just trying to figure out what the responsible management of those reserves is. So I'll turn it over to Karen Bawa and Wyatt to give us their expert opinion on the management of the reserves. And that's all of the reserves, capital reserves, unallocated, all of them.
And if I could defer to Ms. Bawa.
Good evening, Council. So on that, I would like to say that my thinking is with the financial advisors that we should be prudent and continue to build that 2-year delay that we had modeled for in the development, and wait till we get the next year's payment. I know there might be another 1 or 2 payments coming along in '24, so that might be the right time when we do the CIP to allocate once we have the funding in place for the CIP. So that is, Ms. Mester, if you want to show that page, I think it's some 60-something in the financial summaries on the book. So we have about $12 million that we would end in capital reserve, and that along with $1.5 million in permit reserve, and about $17 million in unassigned fund balance makes up roughly 30% of the current available fund balance. The policy calls for 20%. However, if you may recall, when we modeled, we built the reserve in the first few years so that we can draw it down in the following few years, just to smooth the impact of that on the residents and the taxpayers. So just along those lines, I mean, that is the chain of thought, that we should wait and look at the bigger picture when we have the full CIP going. We do have a year-end that's coming. When we looked at the 7-month, we had some extra money coming in revenues, more than projected. So that'll be the next look at the balance, year-end balance, I think in September, October. That's the time frame we look at when we allocate. And then before that, looking at the current year. I'm just kind of putting all the risks together with all the reserves that we have, just so that we have a bigger picture when we have a fuller. First, we wait for the legislation. That's the operating risks we're building in the budget. Then we have the capital reserves and other reserves. We have budgeted out of the permit reserves for 6 positions. So it is, if you look at over the total debt, $167 million that we have for the city, we have a current available balance of the 30% number, it's on page 63, I think. So yeah, somewhere in the 34 million, that was the number that was there. My advice is that we wait till next year on that and see how the development plays out, the funding that we need to reserve to the payment, the second payment for next year, the first full payment, we haven't received that yet. So I'll stop there and see if there are any follow-up questions on that.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up question, Mr. Snyder? You're muted.
I don't. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Duncan?
See, the structural problem, as my colleagues all know, the structural problem that we have here is that we're allowed to spend money pretty much whenever we feel like it during the course of a year. But we only get one opportunity to set the tax rate. And, you know, I'm just going to have to leave it up to you guys to figure out whether we can even find a half a penny to knock the silly 123.5 down to 123 in a budget the size of the budget that we have, with reserves the size that the CFO has outlined. Looking at things positively, the pre-allocation, I like that word. Basically, the BJ's money being pre-allocated, that's the kind of creative thinking that I'd like us to apply to some of the other elements of the budget where we have pressing needs, and certainly to the half cent that I would hope that we could trim the tax rate further. It's also helpful that our consultants, Davenport, have said once construction of the West Falls project is further along and potential project delays and other risks has been reduced, then Davenport believes the city could utilize the capital reserve to help fund one-time capital needs without risk to the city's AAA credit ratings. That's a very important sentence. Examining the status and overall progress of the West Falls project can be done in conjunction with developing the CIP next year. So everybody else can read this just as I have. The reason I'm just trying to get it on the record is, you know, next year's budget, to my mind, starts the day after we finally settle on whatever tax rate and spending that we're going to be settling on for 22-23, because it's right out there. You know, the ability to have a significant impact on the tax rate beyond what the manager's proposed. The manager's proposal is a good proposal, but the ability to do more is right there. You know, it's just almost within reach. If there were some way that we could set the tax rate, you know, in September instead of May, I think we'd be in good position to meet a lot of the concerns that you hear in the community about, gee, you guys got all this money sitting around, and we've done a lot of development, we've earned a lot of money. We need to be able to deploy at least some of that into savings for taxpayers as we deploy most of it into improving and increasing services. End of that speech. One question I do want to understand, because I would not be able to answer it, is what is the difference between maintenance of a street, which happens once every 20 years or 50 years or 80 years, I think I've seen that number, and a standard capital project like a school, which we build once every 20 years or 50 years or 80 years? Why is maintenance the way we do it, which basically is, at least my experience on West Street was, we went down, you know, to the core and started all over again and rebuilt the road, and it's going to last for 50 years probably. Why is that kind of work not just considered a capital project and therefore eligible for being funded through some of our other funding vehicles that we're using to meet capital needs elsewhere? You see what I'm asking?
I think it depends on the scope of the work, and but just, you know, what we've been discussing when we say we're not doing maintenance enough, it's just your basic paving job where you know, and that doesn't last, that does not last 50 years typically. And
does it last 20 years? I mean, I'm hung up on these numbers because, you know, when we build the library or the school, we think we're doing a pretty good job if we built something that'll last for a generation. And it seems to me like a paved street in Falls Church basically is lasting for a generation because we're only doing it once every 25 years at best.
Well, maybe a different way to think about it is, do you have to do it every year? And the answer to that is yes. Unless we wanted to take out debt and, you know, pave every street in the city, and then, you know, we're not going to do it that way. And as part of the reason is because VDOT also has standards. They provide us with money to pave the streets, and they come in and they test them and they grade them as well and kind of look over our shoulder, and they expect a reasonable level of effort year in and year out for just regular maintenance. And so when you're talking about ways and means, it's, taking care of the paving of your streets is not a good thing to use debt for, which is kind of the crux of the matter, and it's not a great thing to use reserves for either. It really should be something that's built into your operating budget and you're taking care of it. And so, what I really probably should be doing is advocating for more of that 535,000 going into paving. And instead, we've taken the dip into reserves, knowing that we'll have the dollars next year as an incremental step to getting us on our maintenance, where ultimately our professionals are saying we need to be.
Okay, well, thank you for answering the question. If everybody's satisfied with that as an answer, we need some approach that obviously year in and year out does what I would call more than just maintenance, but, building actual sidewalks where none now exist. To me, that's an entirely capital project because it's a sidewalk that's going to last forever in some form, but certainly in a new sidewalk, it's going to last for 20, 25 years if it's done right. Just seems to me like a lot of the time that we've spent in the last year here has been on this point. We need to do more with streets, more with sidewalks. So, yeah, I mean, if the method that we're using to finance those seems insufficient to you, then by all means, let's hear about an alternative. The other point I wanted to ask about was the advice from Davenport on the first couple of bullet points. There's a couple of times reference to a metric that maybe I should remember this, maybe others do remember it. The city's outstanding debt to full value was 3.7%, which is well above the national AAA bond rating median of 0.8%. That's a very interesting number, but it doesn't, to me, connect up to tax rate. So in order to be at the national AAA median of 0.8%, what would our tax rate need to be? I mean, is Davenport telling us that the tax rate that we have is just woefully low to hit the AAA mark, which we've already hit, by the way? I mean, we've earned that AAA rating with the current management practices that we've been employing, so we must be doing something right. And similarly, as fiscal year end, outstanding debt service to expenditures 14.2%, also well above the national AAA median of 8.3%. So if we hit that national AAA median, what would our tax rate need? Is there a Davenport tax rate? In the way that there's an equalized tax rate that we've referred to, that people understand what your tax rate should be if it were to collect no more money given new assessments. But is there a higher number that we're falling short of?
I don't think so. I don't think Davenport is expressing an opinion on our tax rate. What they're expressing an opinion on is our level of debt. And as everyone knows, because of the capital improvements that we've undertaken, we have a high amount of debt on any metric that you want to use, and they just used 2 in this discussion. I think that's the point they're trying to make.
But it's debt service to expenditures, and expenditures are driven by your tax rate. I mean, your expenditures, the scope of your expenditures is, inextricably linked to the size of your tax rate. I don't know. Maybe this doesn't bother anybody else, but when I read that, I thought, gee, are we ever going to be able to satisfy our financial consultants, or do they just live in a land that is so apart from, the people that they're trying to answer to and impress, that we're never going to meet up, with them on that number, and I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, again, I don't think they're ever encouraging anybody on a tax rate here or there. They're just talking about basic metrics that any outside observer is going to apply when they look at the city's financial condition.
Okay, and then my last question. Are we borrowing? What do we anticipate borrowing in the next 5 years?
Ms. Bawa?
Mr. If you want to get into CIP. So on the CIP, we have the 10-year CIP that was presented. We have smaller requests for debt, more like the park master plan, some for sewer, and some for stormwater. Stormwater is being made whole by ARPA for the time being, but over the 6-year window, we have So you're asking for future borrowing, right?
I'm just trying to get some idea, how much, what are we going into the market to borrow, and to what degree do we need to impress the market, therefore, with the numbers that we're hitting in terms of our tax rate and our debt to expenditures and so forth. I mean, I understand that we were very definitely needing to impress the bond raters when we were undertaking the school and the other city hall and library and all that. We all did that. We all pulled together to make sure that happened. We got our AAA rating. What I'm trying to understand now is, having expended that tremendous effort and basically set a tax rate that we're working to bring down,
So
how quickly can I be bringing it down without risking any financial harm to the city in terms of borrowing?
So in fiscal year '23, we have, in the CIP, we have a need for debt financing of about $3 million. That is together with the sanitary, sewer, and general fund needs. So I think if you read along their advice, it is that cash in hand at this point is good, and we can use this in lieu of issuing debt, since the interest rates are going to be rising, are on the rise. And then if you look at a 10-year window, or let's see, 6-year first, the total debt to be issued there, according to this plan, is close to 20 million, 21. 14 for general fund and 7 for sanitary sewer, and 2 more, so 23 million. And if you look at the 10-year window, it is 19 plus 8, 26, that's 27 plus 6, so about 33 million in 10 years. So that's the total debt financing we're looking for.
Okay, so a fairly modest number, even over a window as long as 10 years. Okay.
And just going back to your question on the debt to expenditure, so our policy was 12%, and we kind of made ourselves a little bit of cushion for the years where we have acquired a lot of debt, and we're seeing the peak in the debt service for the first few years. We're hitting the 14. We've said the policy not to exceed 15%. Another metric over there to keep in mind would be the payout ratio. The 5-year and the 10-year, we have exceeded those thresholds as well. And based on those, looking at those numbers, the advice is that we be more cautious in using those reserves quite yet.
Okay, and I think I asked this last week, and maybe you wrote it in your Q&A and I just missed it or haven't gotten to it yet. Anticipated underspending or surplus at the end of the current fiscal year, our 10-month report, either that number or, what that number's been over the last 5 years, just trying to get some idea of, if there's any more revenue out there that we could pre-allocate to whatever the majority of us want to reallocate it to next week, because that's when we're going to get the chance to set the tax rate. Year end?
So the last report that we did was the 7-month report, and I'm going to speak off with my memory. It was the revenue over, the budget target was a little over $1 million number at that point. Since then, I do want to report, you did ask me at one of the meetings last week if anything has stood out since then. So there are businesses that pay, that are actually physically in Fairfax, but they pay Falls Church accidentally, and those adjustments happen. That adjustment number has actually turned out to be much larger than what we had noticed. We just found out when they're doing the audits at the Commissioner of Revenue. The number is actually more around 350 to 400,000. They're still working out the details. So that is some big number that is not to our advantage that I just found out within the last 1 week.
The annual adventure of finding out who's been paying their taxes to the wrong jurisdiction. It seems like that always comes up right about this time every year. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know. Glad you guys are keeping track of that. I guess one other thing, I noticed the Fairfax situation, and I'm sure the manager probably has this off the top of his head. Just let me read. Fairfax County government is going to set their rate at 111. 3-cent decrease in their current rate. However, due to increased assessments, property tax bills will still increase by $465 on average, or 6.7%, according to a county projection. So my last question, I guess, to the manager, you've given us this number before, and I've probably written it down here, but somewhere, what is our comparable number? I can tell you what the number is for my house, but, you know, although I think my house is pretty typical, the fact that I'm going to be paying about $1,400 more in taxes next year at 123.5 is not the average or the median. What is our average or median number going to be in terms of real dollars paid out with a 123.5 tax rate?
So at 8.5-cent reduction, the average homeowner is going to experience just over a $600 increase in their tax bill.
So in the city, we're going to have a $600 increase. In the county, they're going to have a $465 increase. Okay, well, I'll leave it up to, my colleagues to decide how they feel about that. Some folks say that's the price you pay for being little. Others would say, can we trim that down just a little bit, by half cent even, to try to bring ourselves more in parity with the jurisdiction next to us. Okay, thanks y'all very much.
All right, other questions, comments? Yes, go ahead, lady. Now, too, I'd again like to plan to take a break at 9:30 or thereabouts, so
Try to keep it to.
you got 8 minutes.
Thank you. So I appreciate the Davenport kind of assessment for us on page 3, which if I were to sum up all that technical speak, it's not yet. Don't touch reserves yet. But I hope it's soon, because I want to go to page 65. And Karen, I think you were quoting these numbers. This is 65 of the budget book that shows debt to expenditures. So that scary 12%, 15% number. So Davenport's numbers is from FY21, which was 2 budgets ago. We are now debating FY23. And if you can see from page 65, if you have your budget book, or there you go. Currently in FY23, we're expected to be back down at 12%. And next year we'll be below our 12%, which was our original kind of target. So we're no longer even reaching the 15%. So while I understand the sentiment of not yet, I hope it is soon that we talk about drawing down reserves in a responsible way. Because again, I think other people have said it up here. I have a really hard time reconciling to our constituents that there's all these unmet needs, and all the unmet needs on page 50-something in our budget book. The letters we get daily about bike lanes and sidewalks and traffic calming, and not be able to respond to those needs when we're sitting on $30 million. So while I understand that this may not be the right time, given some of the uncertainties, it does need to be soon. And so we can revisit this conversation at mid-year, if not the next budget cycle. So, thank you.
Other comments?
I second that. Wasn't a motion, but I second that.
I do too.
Well, I would just offer a counterpoint to this, that with respect to this project, the 10 acres, right now there's nothing built, and presumably everything's going to go according to plan, but really it becomes much more certain when there's buildings starting to rise up. We're not there yet. Hopefully we'll be there soon, but to me that's when sort of the tide turns in terms of certainty that we're going to be able to pay for the high school without having to make significant increases in taxes. And so I think we're getting close, but also recall that the city didn't have AAA bond ratings across the board until just a couple years ago. It's only in the past, I don't know, what is it, 3 years ago, Wyatt, 4 years ago, something like that, that we finally got AAA bond ratings across the board after our entire history. So, I think that what we're doing at the present is prudent, and it's why we have been able to lower the tax rate these past few years, including this year, and why we have gotten the outside world to basically, bless our policies. But I think this moment is not the time to change those. The day is coming when reserves will be freed up. I don't think we're here now. I think that's probably clear, hopefully, to all of us, at least to my mind. That day is coming, but I don't know whether it's in 6 months or, a year or 2 years. But I think we need to be careful and prudent, and that's why we are where we are right now, which is a very strong fiscal position. So I wouldn't call it a counterpoint, but I would just say that I think we need to be careful and conservative when we make decisions about this, given our historic debt load that we're carrying right now. And so I would continue to be deferential to our financial advisors, Davenport and Company, and have them continue to give us direction. Other comments?
Well, I've got 4 minutes before our break.
All right.
I did want to make sure we spend time on the senior tax relief expansion that the treasurer has drafted for us. Jody, to make sure I'm understanding. So last week we talked about 42 people currently being helped, and then with the expansion of, I forget, 65,000, it was going to go up to like 45. Now the numbers I'm looking at are 72. So I'm confused. Is this plus 20,000? We're able to help another 30 people?
Well, not exactly. So because of the way that we account for deferrals versus abatements, I mean, we basically, and I think it was actually mentioned last week or the week before, we basically account for them the same way. We count it all as abatements. And then when we get someone who, we get that deferral money paid back, that comes in, it's basically like a surplus. We don't budget for that. So when we did our initial iteration where we said, oh, it's gonna cost us $65,000 and we're only gonna be able to add like 3 people to the program, but we're gonna move people up from deferral to abatement, we were accounting, we were basically adding that again, and that's incorrect. So when Kieran and I got our heads together and, she started talking about, well, let's look at the average, it's not adding, like the average, person pays X, for, or we pay X for tax relief, and it didn't quite add up. And then that's when I started looking at it further, and I was like, oh, okay, I see what's happened here. So actually, that first iteration, which is on page 6, where we were going to make some modest changes and be able to move some people who were in deferral up to full tax relief, and add maybe about 3 people to the program, that cost would really only be about $30,000. So then when I went back to the drawing board and we wanted to see what would happen if we could increase the asset limits even more, and we used that $800,000 number for the deferral-only category, and we said raise it to $500,000, the asset limit for all the relief categories. And then anybody between, 500 and 800,000 in assets, that would be a deferral-only category. And we would actually be able to eliminate that second deferral-only category. We would do that by raising the income limit even higher. In the first iteration, we had said we would raise it to 110,000. And currently, Arlington, their income limit, their highest income limit is 109,500. Alexandria is 100,000. Fairfax's highest income limit is 90,000. So we thought, okay, let's see what would happen if we raise it to 175,000, which would definitely be the highest out of all the surrounding jurisdictions. But that would be, again, only for that deferral-only category. For relief, our highest income limit would be 90,000, and then anything between 90 and 175 would be deferral-only. Anyway, if we did all of that, and I just went back and I looked at all the people who had applied and we had denied over like the last 5 or 6 years, and I said, what would it take to have gotten those people into the program? And the highest income was like 174, and the highest assets was actually 1.7 million, but I knew we couldn't go that high. So I think Mr. Duncan had mentioned 800,000, so that's the number I used. So if we did those things, we could help a lot more people. We could probably bring in about another 12 people into the program, and I've detailed sort of down at the bottom of page 1 in that blue section exactly how we would do that, how many people we'd gain in each category, et cetera. And so for 85,000, yes, we can help 12 more people.
Thank you.
That's an estimate.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. This is obviously really complicated stuff. And so I found myself toggling between page 1 with this latest proposal and 23 and 24 of the budget Q&A, which I think you kind of detailed neighbor comparisons.
Yes.
And because I don't know this as well as you do, do you think this is the right kind of proposed income limits and asset limits? Do you think this is set and benchmarked well compared to kind of our neighbors. And because I think it's good, public policy in general, especially I think Phil's made the point that if we can help people keep them in their homes, it kind of slows down the turnover we see in our neighborhoods. And I think generational diversity is a value we espouse here.
Right.
And so I think this is a good policy that helps meet that. But because you know this better than we do you think that what we're seeing on page 1 now compared to the program we saw last week is a good use of our city dollars here?
I do. I really do. I think it's a win for both the city and for our citizens, our seniors. It keeps them in their homes. And I think it's a good use of our city dollars. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I trust you. Thank you for your work
Okay.
on this.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Either from Mr. Yes,
One,
Mr. Dodd.
and this won't be oh, sorry, no, mine's 30 seconds. Probably not for this cycle, but there are some other, at least one other jurisdiction somewhere that has looked into removing the decal fee, which is $33 a car. And I would just ask, as we plan for the future, to engage with the Commissioner of the Revenue, who's the expert on all things decal, and consider whether that $33 fee for now a permanent decal, we actually don't get a new decal every year, as we all know, which was a good change, could just be waived. It's kind of an annoyance and doesn't amount to that much money, but it's not, everything's money here. But I do think looking at what other jurisdictions have done that have considered and maybe done that would be useful. Again, not for unless you can do it in the next week. Not for right now, but it is something I'd be curious about.
All right, is this a good time to take a break, do you all think? Would people like to take a short recess? All right, what's that? Okay. All right, let's go and take a break till about 9:40 if we can, just a short recess, and we'll reconvene around 9:40. We are back in session. Welcome back to everyone. Thanks for your patience. Let's get back to questions or comments folks might have. Are there additional comments that or questions that haven't been raised just yet? All right. Letty has a final question.
I promise I'll stop after this.
All right.
To Phil's question about kind of the structural issue we face, which is, we have a lot of reserves, which we've made the point about already, the year-end surplus, which I think has happened. I think last week I had asked for a report on, or at least some sort of data on, maybe say past 5 or 8 years worth of year-end budgets and where we've ended up. My recollection from the 6 years I've been on council is we often have a year-end surplus. And so that would be helpful data for us to consider.
Did we miss a question?
You did miss that question.
Oh.
I don't know if it's strategically or not.
Oh, yeah, we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
All right, other questions or comments or requests? Ms. Leon?
Just one. I read in here that we had two types of contingencies. The one.
Ms. Leon, can move your mic closer?
It is, but maybe I just need to hug it. Okay. There was mention in here that you had two contingencies. The one that we're talking about, the $1,020,000, and then the $200,000 to support application of the compensation study. Just want to make sure, where is that $200,000? Is that in the departmental budget somewhere, or is that?
So you have properly identified them. So the mechanics of the $200,000 to implement the recommendations of the compensation study, where is that dollar amount found in the budget?
Right now, the money for the compensation study, the 200,000 is in the non-departmental, and we'll move it based on the actual findings of the compensation study when it is out, where the positions are, which departments, and where we need to move it.
Okay.
To actually implement it. We don't even have any amounts, how much.
But it's not reserves, it's just unallocated. Is that, I just want to make sure that $200,000 is, it's not
Yeah.
in the budget, it's in the ether?
So it's appropriated, but not allocated fully.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it, so appropriated, all right.
Yeah, allocation is when you put it for a purpose, but it's in the budget. So the 200, for all purposes, you have given permission to spend it, but which department it's going to end up in, we're going to probably have to come back.
Yeah.
So when's that compensation study going to be done?
So we're going through the steps of the process. So right now, they're actually meeting with employees to discuss job duties. There's also a web portal that employees go to fill out a questionnaire that provides the consultants with a detailed, granular look at their job duties. Supervisors then also fill out that same questionnaire. They can't change the employees' entries into that, but they can add their own additional viewpoint in terms of what the job descriptions are. And then they take those job descriptions and they use those to compare to other jobs and then compare the compensation levels for those jobs. So that work is happening right now. Bottom line is, I think it's probably going to be another 2 months or so before we have the results of the compensation study.
Mr. Mayor, may I speak?
Of course.
So I'm 100% behind that very important endeavor. And as I think I said last week, definitely want to make sure that our compensation is, regionally appropriate and keeps pace with inflation if we're going to have to deal with inflation. Given the timing that you've laid out there, I wonder if that $200,000 is authorized in the budget that you presented, if we could move that $200,000 to property tax relief next Monday and be as confident as we can be of anything that we will get that $200,000 back in the year-end surplus, underspending, call it what you will. And so we would be able to head into July able to deploy that $200,000 as the compensation study, which would be finishing up right about then, would indicate that we should. Can we do that? Would my colleagues at least consider that?
Well, let me understand. This 200,000 is in '23, right? So it's not proposed or available for use until the start of '23, right?
That's right, and the key thing is that whenever you're adjusting salaries, you really do want to use operating revenues to do that, as opposed to using year-end types of dollars. Otherwise, in next year's budget, you'll be starting in a hole.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Of course.
How many positions are we funding with ARPA that we know fully good and well that we're not going to get rid of when the ARPA money runs out? My estimate is at least 3 or 4 on the schools and city side. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but, you know, in the real world we live in, we're already breaching that protocol.
We're not perfect on this protocol, and there's 2 big areas where we're not perfect on it. And one is the use of building permit reserves, and we have to keep a close eye on that, and ARPA. Those are the 2 areas. We also fund some positions out of the CIP, which are grant related. So we have responded to those to basically those opportunities, but also those challenges by funding some positions. Otherwise, we're kind of dead in the water. But we do it with our eyes wide open, and we try not to overdo it. The ARPA dollars, the only reason we really did it is because we know we have 3 years of runway, and so that gives us the ability to maneuver before those funds go away.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, and I don't think we're ever dead in the water here in the fine city of Falls Church with the capable staff and the visionary leaders that we have, including people such as our mayor who, could tell 10 years ago that we needed to get BJ's shaved down. That sort of vision, we're going to be fine here. We really are going to be just fine. And we are going to be just fine because, we haven't talked hardly any at all tonight about why we're in such good shape. We're in such good shape because this is a group of people who are firmly committed to growing our economy. There's 2 ways to afford the things you want. One is to tax them, and the other way is to earn them. And we have worked hard to earn them. And, the runway as it leads into the near future is going to look real fine. And that's accepting that, there's some black swans out there. There's inflation. There's a pandemic. There's, things that are not going to go our way. But just think of the things that have not gone our way just in the 10 years I've been on council and how we've surmounted them. That's a we, a capital we. That's staff, citizens, elected officials. Anyway, I'm just asking for my colleagues to consider that as a possible avenue towards knocking off that silly half penny on the tax rate that we vote on next Monday.
Mr. Snyder, or I tell you what, Mrs. Conley, you had a comment. Let's just not forget about Mr. Snyder. Dave, I'm going to forget because I'm always looking at the screen. Do you want to go ahead and go?
Sure. I wouldn't mind being forgotten about, actually, but no. A couple comments, really, for Wyatt. I am a little bit concerned about next year's, the next fiscal year's situation because we're hiring employees, we're raising salaries, we're adding different types of costs. And I think this was actually a question I asked in our first budget work session. That is, let's model the next fiscal year's budget. Even as we make certain decisions this year, I don't want to be digging us into a big hole the next fiscal year, considering that we're facing inflation increases of now 8% a year. Interest rates are going up. There's the dark cloud of recession. As interest rates go up, it tends to depress real estate values because you need to lower the cost of the real estate if people are paying more. So I'm just trying to get a big picture here as we make our final decisions about, I hope we could lower, meet Phil's request, but we also have a list of additions, and I'd like a chart that clearly outlines what they are and where we're going to get the money to do it. And then I think another question was, what can we expect at the end of this fiscal year in terms of any surpluses so that we can move methodically to do what we have to do next week. If there's certain things that we have to carry over in terms of desires for spending, when can we address that? I think Vice Mayor Letty Hardy asked the same question. I'm just trying to get, a glide path here, if you will, because there have been requests and they're all very legitimate for additional spending. And finally on the reserves, it's great that we're meeting certain benchmarks, but we also have historically high debt, and we have built in these sort of reserves to get us through some very uncertain times. We do not have much money in our pocket from the West End development. We don't, as we sit here today. And if we don't get that, frankly, the city is going to be in dire financial condition if it goes any longer than 2 years. So all I'm saying is, let's be careful. Let's get it on the page, and hopefully we can address both the additional, very legitimate spending requests that people have made, as well as Phil's target. But I just want to make sure we've got the bigger picture to move forward with the parts that I've talked about to form the whole. Wyatt, do you have any comments at all, Kieran?
Well, you covered, I think, kind of a lot of the things we've been thinking about as we put this budget together. And so, I guess in terms of the big picture, we are spending a lot of money. We are allocating a big share of the ARPA dollars, which is a once-in-a-generation amount of money, mostly towards one-time needs and meeting capital needs, sidewalks, stormwater, and that type of thing. On the building permit side, we're using fees so that the construction is happening, is happening in the city. We are using that one-time revenue, but we're doing it to meet a very clear need right now, and we have a 3-year runway for sure where those positions, new positions, are going to be covered. And then in the CIP, we have funded project managers so that we can manage the very large grant-funded CIP that we have. And so we do have some exposure because there have been so many sort of positive things fiscally happening for the city, grants, building activity, and that type of thing. And so that's the good news, and we're trying to respond to that in a responsible way and in a way that is sustainable at least for the next 3 years. We'll constantly adjust according to how the economy goes and how things shake out. So in terms of our immediate exposure, I think all the things that are in this budget are things that we have the resources to pay for certainly through the next fiscal year and into the following year because of these grants and because of the economic development that's happening in the city. Beyond that, we'll just have to continue this conversation and continue to assess. And if we continue to grow, then we'll need to continue to meet the critical needs that come with that growth. If the economy stops that growth, then we're going to need to adjust. And we've all seen in our careers that can happen shockingly fast. And when it does, one of the reasons we have a AAA bond rating is because we do have the ability in our budget to make adjustments. And that's sort of a feature of Virginia law, but it's also, I think, part of the financial planning that this city has had, that when we have to, we can make the adjustments that we need to make to protect the city's fiscal health and all the vital services that we provide.
Okay. So just a quick comment. I just want to lay this out. I do think we have a mechanical issue to deal with, which is to get down, take the remaining, the contingency that you built in, and that's really ours, I believe, to allocate, to take a look at that. What are the spending increases that folks want, and just work through that. And I referenced Phil's desire for the $0.005. It's certainly my desire, and I suspect everyone else's desire. So let's see what we can do. But I would like a picture that lays it all out, perhaps more clearly even than we have it tonight. So thanks a lot for these comments, to be able to make the comments.
Snyder went first because my questions follow on his. So I'm looking at this markup slide, and we've got $535,000 to play with, essentially, Mr. Shields, that we have to figure out what to do with this $535,000. That's the question in front of us right now for next week's budget. Okay. And we've talked about different things over time, like cutting off a half cent, or adding a chief of staff position, adding an assistant city attorney, sending some to the schools for the revenue sharing. So all these things are things that we've all talked about. And I think we just need to come together and figure out what it is that four of us at least want to do with that money. So we're kind of getting to that point where there aren't any new projects that anybody wants to throw in, because we've all laid out the projects that matter. But we just need to figure out what to do with it. Or we can hold that 535 in contingency and wait to see what actually happens with the grocery tax, which I don't think anyone has said grocery tax yet tonight. So I'm going to put that in there first, to wait to find out what happens with the state budget. So we could just hold on to all of it for now, keep it in contingency, and then see how things unroll. Okay.
I think you laid out pretty well kind of where we are. We just got to figure out where to go from here.
We just have to figure out where to go, right?
Why don't you give us the other half of your comment?
So, I mean, I would like to hire people to be a chief of staff and to be an assistant city attorney. I would like to share a portion of that with the schools for the revenue sharing fidelity, and then if there's money left for a return to taxpayers, I would support that. But I think it's important that we use this money in service of people in the government.
All right, other comments? Anyone else? And I think you laid out pretty well kind of where we are right now. And the question is, where do we go from here? Which is a challenge, because there's a lot of good things on the table that people want to do. Our taxes have gone up a lot, and I think we've all heard from people whose taxes have gone up, or assessments have gone up 30%, which is really, that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of folks, and I think we need to be mindful of that. So I think, I mean, I don't know if I have a great answer either. I guess just sort of talking through this a little bit out loud. So, Mr. Shields, for example, like if let's say there are different options. One, I think Phil would probably suggest, let's give the money back, reduce the tax rate, and kind of use it up in that fashion. And that if more money came in, for example, from Richmond, or there's more uncertainty there, or surplus would materialize, we could revisit some of these things. That's one option, right? And so that would be, when will we have more information about, quote, surplus and funds that are becoming available, do you believe?
So we'll have our next financial report probably in a month or so, and generally in July we provide a kind of the first look at the year end, just kind of where we are at that point. We really don't have good year end numbers until September, because it takes 2 months for us to get the state and the numbers for sales tax and things like that. So that's
I'm sorry, when would that be?
September is really when we have the clear picture of kind of how the prior fiscal year ended up for any kind of a surplus.
Got it. And in terms of this comment about revenue sharing, which I think is important, I think we've done well these past years with this notion of revenue sharing. In terms of how that might work in this particular instance, I know there's some remaining balance, and some of this we're talking about spending in ways that are somewhat capital-oriented in terms of CIP, paving, things like that. How would that work to your mind, Mr. Shields, this notion of like revenue sharing, how that would fit in with what we're doing right now?
So of the 535, I would think that anything that is involved in a tax rate reduction is outside the bounds of the revenue sharing agreement. That's the way I would view it. For any use of those dollars for operating general government uses, then sort of as the rough rule, every dollar we'd spend of that 535 for general government, $1 would also go to schools. And I also, having seen many budgets where the schools and the general government fought for dollars, I think having this more cooperative approach, I think has been a very beneficial thing for the general government operations and for school operations. So I do think that agreement, or the spirit of that agreement, has been very helpful.
And so if that were to be the case, I apologize, I don't know all the details in terms of things that might be considered carve-outs, for example, like capital expenditures and the like. Out of this 535,000, how would that be allocated according to revenue sharing? Would it be just your 50/50, or would it be something where, traditionally we've done this, things that are capital of nature have not been sort of stuck in the same bucket as traditional operating expenses? Do you have kind of an institutional memory in some of these things?
So traditionally, it's kind of like the big capital things have been outside the revenue sharing agreement. Obviously, $120 million for a high school, that doesn't count against the schools on the revenue sharing agreement. On sort of smaller pay-as-you-go capital, that's also traditionally been outside of the revenue sharing, but usually we do pay-as-you-go with year-end dollars, and so it's kind of a divvying up of the year-end surplus. So there still has been some consideration of what the school's needs are and those pay-as-you-go capital needs as well.
Okay. I'm not sure how crystal clear that is.
I'm sorry, I'm not being super clear.
No, it's okay. Maybe the answer is not crystal clear. I'm just
Yeah,
trying to understand
capital is
Of course.
capital
what's
is
a half a
not
penny?
as clearly laid out as operating
250.
budgets, is the bottom line.
What's a half penny, Mr. Shields?
260,000.
260.
Mhm.
So if you take 535, take away 260, you end up with, can anyone do that really fast?
Probably about 260, I think.
About another 260.
I think, or maybe a little more than, yeah, about that.
Right.
Okay. So I don't know if people have ideas.
Follow-on questions?
Yes.
So, the revenue sharing agreement also extends to kind of the year end, right? So if we true up at the end of the year and we actually have underspending, that's outside of revenue sharing, but if revenues came in above what we projected and we have surplus, we share that surplus, and we've done that the past couple of years, correct?
We share the surplus revenues, but we don't share the underspending.
Got it. So maybe as part of that 5 to 7 year look back, can we also include how much we've shared at mid-year? Because I think that might be a prudent step to take to show that, hey, this is something that we may not commit to in this budget, but we expect FY22 to come out ahead, and you can count on something maybe in September. And if inflation continues the way it is, we can consider, like mid-year bonuses for people then.
So I feel like Phil's wish or target or whatever we're calling it now is keeping us all here into the late wee hours. But I'm sorry about that. Like I said earlier, you get one bite at the tax rate apple. Now, that's not necessarily always been the case. Mr. Snyder, Mr. Tarter, I'll remember the year in 2012 when we ended up with a surplus and we actually had a reset of the tax rate in the form of a tax rebate. We actually sent money, third of the money to the schools, third of the money to the city, third of the money back to the taxpayers. I thought that was a fine thing to do at the time. Still think it was a good signal to send. I'd prefer not to do that again, just because it's an administrative hassle for the staff, and staff's got enough on its table. So I'm looking at a world where by next Monday, that half cent either gets voted on or it doesn't, and it goes away for another full year. If we voted on that half cent and approved it, you're going to have multiple opportunities to decide spending levels for all these other things that we want and need through the summer, into the fall, and, given the frequency of budget amendments that we're asked to consider here, really all the way through the fiscal year. So you, on the spending side, just have a whole lot more flexibility than you do on the taxing side, which is why I'm keeping you here so late at night over really what is not a large amount of money, $255,000.
Well, Ms. Hardy.
So if I can offer a proposal, I was trying to reflect on all the different priorities we've all stated, and I think where we've netted out the past month and a half. So when I look at kind of the one-time dollars and trying to be responsive to what we've heard from the community, Sounds like we are taking care of refugee housing with 50,000. Debbie's request for 50,000 to expand the energy plans that can address some of the climate concerns, and hopefully once we have the plan, we'll be willing to put more dollars against climate change. We have an additional 250 for sidewalks and paving, which will come out of reserves, knowing that we'll have the BJs to backfill that out of operating. So that's kind of one time. And then out of contingency, here's what I would propose. 420 on the CNI. Senior tax relief goes to 85,000 per the treasurer's recommendation. I really would like to see minimum wage take care of kind of the lowest end of the workers, and that's 50,000. And then Phil's 260 half-cent decrease, which would bring a total to 815, and that should leave another 200,000 in contingency until we have a little more certainty from Richmond. So we'll put that on the table for consideration.
All right, thoughts? Yes, Ms. Connolly?
Mr. Shields, just on that contingency, I feel, or maybe Ms. Bawa, I thought I heard that there was more in there than we expect, that contingency is bigger than 1.2 or 1 point, it's not. This is it.
What is that?
If we get it, this is it. Okay.
The grocery's 1.8, could be 1.8, so the
Yes, so the
contingency-
liability was larger than the contingency, but
So we
It wasn't
could,
100% contingency, it was like a 60% contingency.
okay.
That's right.
So we may end up with more if the grocery tax comes through. No.
You could end up with less if the grocery tax didn't go through, like if the grocery
Okay,
tax.
okay.
yes, the risk is that the General Assembly goes sideways and they don't make local governments whole when they repeal the grocery tax.
Okay, everybody,
So,
what do you think, what's the chances of that?
Well, the chances are that they may not make everyone fully whole.
In the
I think
short
that's
run,
that's
in
a
the short
totally.
run, next year.
so what I'm asking is if.
Well, you
if-
guys are
with
bigger
Ms.
pessimists than I
With
am.
Ms. Hardy's proposal, that remains, the $200,000 remains in the contingency. Is that enough if the General Assembly goes sideways? Is that enough to cover our obligations, or where are we going to find that money?
So if things get really sideways, it's not enough. But some contingency, it probably is not a bad idea to bring into July just for kind of the wide range of issues that could be surprising to us in the coming fiscal year. So that's kind of the argument for contingency, which if the council doesn't, at the end of the day, have any council contingency, then we'll figure out other solutions to it. But it would make those decisions down the road perhaps easier.
Other comments? Okay, so we have, I think, some good things to be thinking about. We had some good ideas put on the table today. Unless there's additional discussion that people want to have about it, I think it's just us to think about it and mull it over a little bit. And obviously, we may need to make decisions next week. But unless we're prepared to kind of, go forth tonight, I think maybe this is the end of the conversation for this evening, unless people want to have additional conversation. But I think it's been helpful. We've sort of flushed out some of the issues a little bit more, and I think we have some ideas on the table that are reasonable ones to consider right now. Does anybody else have anything they want to say about budget considerations at the moment? Yeah.
Mr. Shields, we're proposing here that we're drawing down what's remaining in our ARPA balance by $130K. So what's left after the $130K?
Ms. Bala, do you have that figure, or Ms. Mester?
For the ARPA funding?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we'll have
including the $130K that is proposed
We'll have a balance of 2.1 million.
left.
Yeah.
And we will be doing a report to the city council just on how our draw is going of what council's prior allocations are. And I think that after we do that report out, there'll probably be room for some reallocations of dollars that we're not drawing down.
And I just want your recommendation, though, Mr. Shields, is to hold off. I think I heard this earlier, right? But just to reiterate, your recommendation is hold off on allocating any of this 535K until July, when we know a little, hopefully, what's going on in Richmond, right? And it gives us feasibility, insight into appeals impact and just where we're headed in terms of surplus possible for this year.
Yes. So, so that's what we came into the table with, that recommendation. And, but we did, in terms of the discussion tonight, if there is consensus on what Councilmember Hardy laid out, that also is what we will prepare documents for consideration on May 2nd. So that is kind of the, in terms of markup, that is important for council to know or to respond to. If that's how we prepare the documents, then any changes to that would need to be done by motion from the dais. That's generally kind of the way we do it. Now, what we have done in the past is council has said, prepare two ordinances that show it two different ways, which can be done, and we've done in the past, but it is preferable if we don't have to do that.
Your preference, you mean?
Yes, the Scribner's preference is not to have to do it that way.
Ms. Hiscott?
I just wanted to echo support for Letty's proposal, or state support for Letty's proposal. I'm interested in seeing that in markup with addressing. I think it is conservative in still keeping some contingency. It addresses tax rate, it addresses some of the, taking care of some of our most impacted residents, and it also puts a tiny bit towards what our huge goal in terms of greenhouse gas and our environmental emissions goals needs to be focused on. So I think it does a little bit of everything while still remaining pretty conservative. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and give us both versions, Wyatt?
Okay.
And then maybe some, well, just to show, like, to present to us next week.
Yeah.
And if you can, if there's other à la carte items that we can just sort of like have those costs associated with them as well that have been discussed previously. Not necessarily in a motion, but maybe just have that information as part of the staff report.
Okay.
It's
So,
a la carte.
Well, if there's some item that somebody has an interest in that's not in Letty's proposal, that someone may say, hey, well, what about the money? Could we add in the 50,000 for the whatever?
So it's like below the line, so the stuff you can pull up in case we have excess. Deputy attorney, right, chief of staff, right, the things that Mary Beth said. So it's like, here's the list, and there's the stuff that's prioritized according to what Letty's saying, but then just documenting the list of à la carte items that we could move, right, to the funded side. Yeah. Yeah. Pull it from the unfunded list. Yeah.
But your expression tells me you're very interested in
So, I mean, in the ordinances, they have, whole columns of numbers, and all those numbers have to be correct. And so, if you do those, can it be done just by a motion, or does the whole ordinance then need to be fixed on the spot? So that's the reason we've tried to pre-prepare them, so all the numbers add up correctly.
So if we don't want to make this torturous for you, but I think that, I can't say that we all have a consensus here about everything that, we heard a proposal which has a lot of merit to it, but there may be some other things upon reflection that someone may say, hey, I forgot totally about this thing we talked about 2 weeks ago, and it's really important to me personally that we consider this addition. So I guess I wouldn't want to preclude that conversation potentially, but I don't want to create work for you all.
It's not so much creating work, it's just making sure that the documents
Yeah, but I mean, that is
ready
work,
to be
right?
acted
So you'd have to
upon.
run all the numbers to make sure the document turns out.
Yeah, I guess my principal thing is that when you change it from the dais, that process can be difficult. It depends on how complicated it gets. If there's like one or two amendments, it's one thing, but if there's more.
That's sort of what I would anticipate, if any. It would just be one or two. It wouldn't be 12 things. We don't have the money for it, I don't think.
Because of that, we have done multiple motions in the past. That's also equally complicated. If we have a good sense of your direction, or two alternatives, we can create two alternative motions.
So we talked about two alternative motions already, right? So what the managers proposed and what we just heard this evening. I guess what I didn't want to do is preclude the possibility that there's some other, since we're all just sort of doing this right now, that we don't preclude the ability to add in something, a priority that we've heard of, that we just don't immediately come to mind, that maybe we talked about 2 weeks ago or something like that. So that's all really I want to do. I don't want to make this harder than it is or more complicated or have everybody do multivariable analysis. But I guess I just didn't want to preclude consideration of any other item other than was just mentioned 10 minutes ago.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask?
Yes.
So what I hear y'all saying is that the unmet needs list could be attached to a motion just as an informational item, but that the workup that the staff would do in advance of the meeting to avoid multiple motions, which, yes, we've all, well, some of us have been party to that, and it's never a pretty sight. We would have the motion that would be offered, I guess, as an alternative to what's on the table right now, is what Ms. Hardy and Ms. Hiscott and I at least have spoken to. If there's any one more individual who supports that, then that gives you some reasonably clear guidance as to where we're going. I can't speak for everybody else, though, of course. I don't know whether you have a fourth or not.
Well, I think it's heading in the right direction, and it's very possible it will have a fourth, but I guess I didn't want to preclude this moment consideration of other options because staff sort of presents two things to us, one of which we've heard about fairly recently, the public's heard about fairly recently. So I wouldn't want to preclude consideration of other, potential additions, I presume in a fairly minor amount. But to the extent you all are able to prepare to allow us at least consider other, spending priorities, if in fact people want to do that, I think that would be helpful.
Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder, I'm sorry, I have my hand up. Just to add, I would be the fourth to support the approach that Letty Hardy put on the table. And I would say this, if there are other expenditures that people want to make, let's put that list there for future consideration on a priority basis, depending on some of these uncertainties. For example, if we get a significant amount of the grocery tax preserved, if the surpluses from this fiscal year are what are hoped for. So I don't have any problem with that, but I'm pretty satisfied with what's on the table right now, and would hope that if there are additional expenditures, that we think about them to be conditional on additional funding beyond what we're projecting tonight. That would be my recommendation. It's up to others, of course. Thanks.
Bring two proposals. You mean you said the original markup and then the one that we were just
Yeah.
discussing now? Do we think there is need for the original markup if we have a majority that, like the discussion we've had this evening, and then understanding that we still would do, as Mr. Snyder said, a priority list of additional expenditures?
Well, there may not be. I guess that one's already done, right? So I didn't think there's any work involved in bringing that to the table next week.
I didn't know if it required more work to put it all into the proper
Yeah,
format
so
of.
the idea of the markup is that the council gives us direction and then city manager brings you back what you asked for. So whatever he proposed, it's going to be overridden by what direction you're going to give him, and he's going to bring that back to you.
Yeah, so you already have that, right? And so coming to the table with two budgets, it's not going to be an issue, is it, Wyatt?
We have not prepared this.
No, but that one, you've already got direction to go ahead and prepare. We've got 4, potentially more people.
So what I've heard was support for what Letty
Yes.
summarized. Yes, that's what we would be bringing next week.
So what you've already kind of proposed, would that quote go away because you've?
Yeah, that's right. Because this has not been drawn up in ordinance form.
Okay.
And so that's where we're arriving at tonight.
Go ahead.
So Ms. Leon and I are just over here. I just need some clarification.
I can't hear you, Mary Beth.
I'm sorry. I just need some clarification. I'm looking here and we have a remaining balance of $535. We don't know what's going on with the grocery tax. The proposal on the table is that there would be only $200 in the remaining balance. So we're not giving ourselves a lot of space in case there is a problem. That's my concern with this one, is that we are making this commitment without all of the pieces in place. I think in the end, it may end up being a really good budget, but I'm worried that we're going to make that commitment and not know where all the things are, and then things go sideways. So that is my concern with this budget.
but with the proposal. But if 4 people want it, then we're good. My
I mean, I
concern
guess-
is my concern, right?
Well, I mean, to me, I think what would be good is just to sort of see it. You know, it's kind of hard when you're up here right now to kind of hear it quickly, and I think it'd be good to see it in writing and to really just kind of have a chance to ponder it. But I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. So I guess I don't know if there's more to be said right now on this. I mean, I think we have, hopefully have some guidance that you can work with.
We do, yep.
Okay. All right, so let's move on from budget to our next items, which are just wrap up, essentially. Any business not on the agenda? Standing regional committees? Sure.
I just want to remind everyone that the Women's History Walk is Sunday. Can you see that on the thing? Wait, there we go. Sunday, May 1st, from 11 to 2. There's 60 stations and lots to do, and get some exercise, community, learn some history, all at one time. And thanks to the many city staff and volunteers who are making this happen.
All right, looks like a plan. We'll be there on Sunday. Look forward to it. Thanks for all your leadership in that, on that regard. Any other comments?
Just thanks staff for a nice Arbor Day celebration on Saturday. Appreciate the Urban Forestry Department and staff for having a nice event at Jesse Thackeray.
All right.
Economic Development Committee, no less exciting than Mary Beth, but the Economic Development Committee will meet this Thursday at 1 o'clock virtually.
Okay, anything else? All right, what do you say we call it a night?
Do we have minutes? Oh, I know. What do we, are we meeting in person next week because we're voting on the budget? So we're meeting in building here.
Yep.
And just for planning purposes, then we're taking off the week after that?
And there's no meeting scheduled on the 9th. That is correct.
Okay. And so the meeting that we'd have on the 16th would then be in building or a work
That's
session?
the work session, that'll be virtual.
Okay, so work session on the 16th virtual. Okay. There were minutes?
Yeah,
Were
there are minutes.
in the packet? Okay. Anybody else have?
No comments, Phil?
Yeah, hold on just a second. I'm just trying to get to the first page. So, Madam Clerk, line 95, isn't Mary Riley Stiles spelled with a Y? Am I right about that? Yes, okay. And then, line 101, the parked car that flipped and was also inebriated, I don't know, the wording there is, a parked car was flipped by an inebriated and speeding driver?
What line is that?
Line 101. I didn't see anything else, but reserve the right to read the last couple of pages and get back to you. Otherwise, move approval of the minutes of the meeting of March 28, 2022 as corrected.
We have a second?
Second.
Ms. Conley on a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed, abstentions, the ayes have it.
Move to adjourn.
All right, all in favor? A
Aye.
second? All right. We're adjourned. You like that, don't you? Yes.
Thank you, Dave. Enjoy life out there wherever you are. Someplace cool.
Yeah, a lot of meetings. Thank you.